I'm going to give a brief summary of regional cooperation efforts in South Asian region and try to see how it is comparable to regional cooperation efforts in Eurasia. What are the similarities and differences in the two initiatives? I would also like to briefly discuss what were the historical circumstances under which regional cooperation initiatives were taken in South Asia and how these circumstances were different from the one that existed in this part of the world. We know these two regions are contiguous, and in fact till 200-250 years back there has been a continuous movement of peoples, ideas, commerce, religious missionaries between the two regions. This contact was so vibrant that perhaps presently we don't really understand what was the extent and depth of this interaction, but once Central Asia was incorporated into the Tsarist Empire and India became a colony of the British, after that these long-standing and vibrant communication between the two regions stopped. The political developments in the two regions in fact followed very different trajectories from then onwards, end of 18th century, 19th century onwards. India under the British colony, as a British colony, acquired political unification, unification of trade and commerce within the subcontinent, acquired many legacies of parliamentary democracy from the British, which have survived and prospered in India, and this is relevant for Kyrgyzstan because in this part of the world, Kyrgyzstan is the only parliamentary democracy. So this can be subject for one seminar, I would say, parliamentary democracy in India and Kyrgyzstan. But anyway, but India's experience or South Asia's experience at the end of the British rule was very different from what you had here at the time of Soviet dissolution. During the 19th century, in the Indian subcontinent, with the introduction of mass politics, some form of parliamentary politics, some form of electoral politics, and this was done by the British themselves. But electoral politics has its own logic and its own dynamics. And one of the consequences of that was, and this was also a period when socio-religious reform movements and also reassertion of ethnic and religious identities was taking place. So sometimes during 19th century, end of 19th century and 20th century, a form of sectarian religious movements and politics emerged in India, which finally led to the demand for a separate state for Muslims of South Asia. And when Pakistan was created, it was 1947, and in this part of the world we are celebrating or marking, if not celebrating, the end of Second World War, 70 years, and the catastrophic event and the subsequent developments in Europe, which were greatly influenced by that catastrophe. In South Asia also we had our own catastrophe. We had a civil war-like situation in which 1 million people died and more than 10 million people were displaced at the time of independence and creation of these two independent states of India and Pakistan. So the independence era in South Asia was marked by a lot of conflict, violence and bitter memories. And some of the legacies of the colonial past have been unsettled borders or claims over certain territories between at least these two neighbors. There are claims among other neighbors also, but especially between India and Pakistan. It is something similar to, in this part of the world, if you want to understand, something like Armenia, Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, or what we are witnessing in eastern Ukraine, something like that. So that type of conflict has marked the relation between the neighbors, India and Pakistan in South Asia, and the politics and foreign policy of both these countries, which are the largest in South Asia has been generally influenced by this recent historical past. And after independence, of course, the two countries took very different ideational path also. Pakistan tried to create a very distinct identity and distinct type of polity, although superficially both of them have adopted Westminster type democracy, but Pakistan looked westwards towards what we call West Asia or Middle East for its ideological and historical moorings and roots, and has tried to define its identity in opposition to or in relation to India. India has followed a largely secular democratic path, keeping aside religion, although it's a very complex issue, secularism in India, and I would not like to discuss that. But that has been the basic factor which has determined regional cooperation in South Asia. Initially, for quite some time, since the relations were hostile and conflictual, so there were no initiatives. And interestingly, the initiative for regional cooperation in South Asia came not from India, but from a smaller neighbor, that was Bangladesh. So the first idea was mooted in 1980. It took 5 years after many foreign secretary level talks and ministerial meetings. Finally, on 8th of December 1985, the SAARC was launched in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. It is 30 years now, and the report card of SAARC is very mixed. On the one hand, let me tell you, it is a regional organization which is the largest in terms of population in the world, with more than 1.5 billion. In fact, it is almost 1.7 billion people. But on the other hand, if you see the extent of regional, in economic terms, regional cooperation, the intra-regional trade, the trade among the South Asian countries, accounts for just 5% of their overall global trade, just 5%. If you compare that with EU, the EU member states, for them, 55% of their trade is intra-EU, within the countries of EU. In case of NAFTA, it is 52%. Even in case of ASEAN, which has cross-continental or regional linkages, even there, and of course it is considered one of the successful experiments in regional cooperation, it is 22%. You compare that with South Asia, it is just 5%. There has been various initiatives for regional, greater economic cooperation in South Asia. There is, of course, under SAARC, there has been a SAFTA or South Asian Free Trade Agreement. There has been a social charter, among the other achievements, if we may call them. There has been Convention on Terrorism. SAARC development goals were pronounced a few years back. There is also Convention on Trafficking of Women and Children, Convention on Terrorism. There has been agreements on child welfare. There are talks. In fact, the South Asian Free Trade Agreement basically covers only goods. It does not cover services or investment. So there has been talk about including even services and investment. But even when it comes to free trade agreement, the success of SAARC or South Asia has been very limited. As I said, only 5% of the trade of South Asian nations, countries, is intra-regional among themselves. So their achievement in this regard is very limited because, and here at this stage I would like to mention that what binds South Asia is sheer economic logic, but what divides them is politics. So it is very different from what you have. The discussion that we had since yesterday, I could see that the general consensus opinion is that the main driver for Eurasian Economic Union is political and not so much economic. There is still a debate as to how much economic benefit the member states are going to get. Kyrgyzstan, or even for that matter, Russia. There are opinions that ultimately, if this union is to continue, Russia will have to make compromises. Russia will have to make this option attractive to other member states by maybe providing subsidized energy or by opening its markets for its much larger, bigger market for other member states, or perhaps providing free movement of labor to Russia. So Russia will have to perhaps incentivize Eurasian Economic Union to the other member states. The overwhelming logic, it seems, as I understand from discussion here, has been political and not economic. In case of South Asia, it is the other way around. The economic benefits are huge, and most of the countries realize this. But despite this realization, the intra-regional trade is very limited. The first and foremost reason behind this is the inhibition on part of many of the South Asian countries, and most notably the second largest country in South Asia, that is Pakistan, its inhibitions towards India. Its overall attitude and approach to link up with the West, to see its future, its historical, as I said, civilizational roots and moorings in West Asia, and for its military and economic security and prosperity, it would like to align with US and the West, and in the recent past, increasingly with China. But South Asia has never been a priority. The priority, the focus of Pakistan has been to somehow de-link from South Asia. So that's why, so in this South Asia free trade agreement, you see there are so many ifs and buts. So they have put a sensitive list of commodities. There is a positive list, there is a negative list, there is a sensitive list. There are various ways in which some of the countries try to inhibit or try to prevent intra-regional trade, because even though they know that they are going to benefit greatly. So in case of Pakistan, for example, without being seen as a Pakistan basher, which I don't want to be seen, but I have to bring in that, it is generally believed that Pakistan will be a greater beneficiary of opening of trade and becoming a transit for India's trade with West Asia, Middle East, and further Central Asia, Europe. So India has about $800 billion of foreign trade, which is not very big if you compare it with China, but which is still very significant, $800 billion. And according to some estimates, if the borders are opened, if transport routes are facilitated, if transport infrastructure is created, then nearly 40 to 50% of this trade is going to flow through land routes, which basically means Pakistan and Afghanistan. So Pakistan is going to be a huge beneficiary of this opening up. But despite that, because of political considerations, and sometimes even though Pakistan may be a bigger beneficiary, but if India is also a beneficiary, then Pakistan is not agreeable to that. So the basic point that I am trying to make is that economics unites, and there are so many economic reasons for South Asia to come together, to unite, but the political reasons prevent unification or further integration of South Asian region. And in this sense, South Asia, which as I said, is the largest in terms of population of regional groupings, I believe yours is among the smallest. You talk about 183 million, but if you compare it with EU, with NAFTA, or with ASEAN, it is much smaller. So you are, as far as the population goes, among the smallest, all right, and we are the biggest, but we are the least integrated. The level of integration of Eurasian Economic Union is still not very clear, and since yesterday I have been listening to various prognoses about how this doesn't make much economic sense. I feel it is still too early. I am told, one of my teachers told that some 50 years, 40 years back, when Mao was asked to comment on French Revolution, he said it is too recent to comment on it. All right, and it was already 170 years old when Mao said so. And you are just starting. And so I don't think this is the right time, or this is absolutely premature to talk about what would be. This is the age of instant analysis, I understand. But it is too early to say, because many of the things are still not clear. I don't know, for example, and I would like to know from those who are experts here, that I know that Kyrgyzstan in itself is a relatively small market for China or even for Russia. But I also know that a lot of China's trade with countries further apart, nearby Uzbekistan or further apart, is done through Kyrgyzstan. So what is going to happen to that? So Kyrgyzstan in many ways was re-exporting the goods coming from China to countries or serving as a transit. What is going to happen to that? I don't know. What is going to happen to the large movement of labor from Kyrgyzstan to Kazakhstan and Russia? What is going to happen to that? We need to have more focused studies to ascertain, to assess how much of foreign remittances or foreign workers or laborers were going from Kyrgyzstan to Russia and Kazakhstan in the previous period. Of course, with the slowdown in the last 4 or 5 years, and especially in the last 1.5 years, the decline in the hydrocarbons, oil prices, means that many of the economic activities, construction activities in Russia and Kazakhstan has come down. So less need for labor force. So that means less requirement for people from Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan or Uzbekistan. So I don't know. So this could be one reason why there may have been a decline, but it needs more analysis, it needs more study to see what is the impact as of now, and what could be the impact of economic integration in your part of the world. We are moving very slowly, at a very halting, slow pace. 30 years have passed since SAARC was launched. SAFTA was launched only recently. So we are moving at a very gradual, step-by-step method, but there is a definitive increase in the intra-regional trade in South Asia, and there are possibilities that this trade is going to increase. In fact, since the main problem is between India and Pakistan, and you can imagine if Ukraine joins, it is not going to do so, but if it joins, you can understand the type of problems that Eurasian Union will have. Russia and Ukraine, if they are in the same regional grouping. So India and Pakistan have these problems. Who is more responsible? I am not discussing, I am not blaming. But the problems are there. So that is a big hindrance. What many countries of SAARC are doing is, they have started sub-regional groupings. So those countries which have less of territorial or political issues, mainly India, Bangladesh, Nepal and Bhutan, they have started their own subgrouping and regional initiatives. For example, a Motor Vehicles Act was signed this year, and the idea is free movement of goods and transport vehicles among these countries. So such sub-regional initiatives are already on the way, Pakistan realizes, at times Pakistan realizes that it might be left behind if it doesn't join, because in the last summit in Kathmandu, Pakistan blocked SAARC motor vehicles agreement from being signed, because Pakistan does not want that there should be a free movement of trade and commerce and vehicles. Afghanistan wants, because that will greatly benefit Afghanistan. Pakistan doesn't want. But there are sound economic logic, and there is a momentum which I believe is going to force and persuade, not force in the political sense, but economic sense, all the countries of the region to further lower down their tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, and to allow freer movement of goods and finally services and investments as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now collect some questions from the floor. I already see at least 3 hands up. So let's take these 3 together. You please introduce yourself and please also indicate who your question is addressed to.
My name is Rajat. I belong to Afghanistan, and I'm doing my master in SAARC and Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And my question is, first I have to give a comment regarding Professor Sanjay Pandey's presentation. First, it was good presentation. So we can say that as Professor Sari presented that, is regional integration possible in any region? And short answer, I can say no. Why? Because we have different social structure in South Asia. We have different different political views, which is twin neighbor powers, Pakistan and India. And this is even a minor clash between the states inhibit or hinder the economic integrations. I can give examples. There is one blame game from Pakistan against India, India against Pakistan, and again from Afghanistan toward Pakistan. So first, this is one thing. And my question will be that, what do you suggest as a political analyst, as you suppose you are Indian officials? So how do you suggest to make SAARC an effective organization as compared to ASEAN, as compared to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as compared to recently Eurasian Economic Union? So what do you suggest to make these unite?
Next question. You wanted to, yeah. And then you, Vadim.
Thank you for the speakers. I have a question for Sanjay. And concerning your perspective about deepened economic cooperation between India and Pakistan, I think that it could be a good thing. But I think that in my perception, in your scenario, you don't take the role of China, because there is a strong strategic partnership between China and Pakistan, and China is playing to boycott, maybe a rapprochement between India and Pakistan. Only 2 instances. The first one is that Pakistan is one of the pairs of the so-called string pairs of strategy, or the maritime Silk Route. Because Pakistan is a key to bypass Malacca in order to divert energy, oil and gas to China. The second point is that China is working to develop the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline, and if this project will be realized, I think that the other project which involve India, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline should downplay its relevance in the region. So, and I would like to know your opinion about that. I think that only if China and India work together in the regional framework, it is possible to rapproch Pakistan and India and also China in a wider regional framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Vadim, and then and then we will give a chance for the panelists to answer. Yeah, yeah.
My question would be to Mr. Yassar Sari. I remember one thing now, maybe now you have 2015, maybe 5 years ago, when I started to study Eurasian Economic Union. At that time it was, I think, even Eurasec or Customs Union. Nobody in the West was speaking about this, and nobody expected that now we will have Eurasian Economic Union. And at best, experts, and even experts, some experts in Russia were speaking, oh, we will never have Eurasian Economic Union, it will be the same thing as of this. And now we are comparing already European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. So my question is, we have it in place, and here we in last slide we see regional integration is not possible in many regions if we don't have the condition, and we see that Eurasian Economic Union actually doesn't have these conditions. So what your prediction for Eurasian Economic Union? And my last note is that Crimea came suddenly and unexpectedly. So I think very big mistake sometimes in the West is that the West doesn't expect from Russia the things they get in the end. So from my point of view, we should expect that, at least expect and think about the possibility that Eurasian Economic Union can develop and have the perspective. And from your presentation, it is possible to understand that it has no future. So what's your prediction? Because I wouldn't prefer to have Crimea come unexpectedly again.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll let the panelists answer, and then we'll take the next bundle of questions. Yeah?
Thank you very much. My co-panelist, Dr. Yassar Sari, very rightly said that there are certain preconditions or requirements for regional integration, and one of the preconditions he mentioned was a certain civilizational or ideological unity among the member states, which exists in case of EU, as you very rightly said. But whether it exists in Eurasia, that is a question. Of course, yesterday also there were presentations about this idea of Eurasianism, Evrasistva, whether that can be a uniting idea. And many of the countries in this region have long debated, and Russia is not the only one. Kazakhstan, Olza Suleymanov. And he wrote something 30 years back, 35 years back, in which he tried to show that how the Turkic and the Slavic civilization, there is this medieval tale of Igor's campaign, adventures of Prince Igor. And he says that the original version of that had many Turkic words. But in the early 18th century, after Peter's reforms in Russia, once Russia started to westernize, Europeanize itself and tried to redefine its identity as a European country, there was a conscious effort to exclude the Turkic influence or Turkic words. So what I'm trying to say, there is a historical link and continuity even in this part of the world. And in fact, Olza Suleymanov was at that time not punished, but he was reprimanded by the Communist Party, by the Soviet Union of Writers, and but later on, so these ideas are there, that there is a certain unity between the Slavic and the Turkic people of Eurasia, Central Asia, and Russia. Maybe for political reasons, today many of the countries of Central Asia would like to emphasize their distinctness rather than the linkages and bondage. The same, to some extent, is the case with South Asia. South Asia has a large civilizational, cultural contiguity, although it's a continent. I mean, the differences that are there in South Asia or within India can be compared to South America, Latin America, or Europe. But nevertheless, there is a certain civilizational linkage. But civilizational linkage is there, ideological is not there. When ideology is a recent phenomenon, is a modern phenomenon. So in modern times, many of the countries have tried to define their ideology, and to that extent they would like to redefine their civilization and history also in a different light. And that's why the differences occur. And that is at the root of problem in South Asia. Many of the countries, not just Pakistan, but many others also have other orientations, maybe towards Southeast Asia. All right, so that's the problem. But what will bind, or what are the prospects, or where China figures in all this? Now, China recently, this year, Xi Jinping traveled to Islamabad and he announced an investment of $45 billion in infrastructure and industrial sector of Pakistan. But how much of this will actually come through is still a moot point. China has announced large investment plans for Afghanistan, but not much has come about. So, and also don't forget that China has bigger stakes in India. Pearl of strings is there. But at the same time, China's trade with India is 80 billion as of now. And within 1 year, it is projected to be around $100 billion, China-India trade. So for China, despite all the political differences, India is the ultimate destination, ultimate economic partner in South Asia. I mean, in South Asia. The various TAPI or IPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, or India, Pakistan, Iran, Pakistan, India, these various pipeline projects, the ultimate destination will be India. Unless India joins in, these initiatives do not make much economic sense. India is 7 times bigger than Pakistan in GDP and in trade and economic terms. So ultimately, India cannot be excluded. Pakistan, to an extent, understands. Recently, last year, there was this agreement between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which will allow Afghan goods to come to India via Pakistan. But strangely, Pakistan would not allow Indian goods to go to Afghanistan via Pakistan. So it is one way. But this does not make economic sense or logic. Ultimately, Pakistan realizes, and Pakistan will have to open up because of its own economic needs and requirements. Because that is the only, it is almost a basket case, Pakistan. If they have to come out of it, the surest and the easiest way is to open up with India. As of now, in fact, many times they are trading goods and services through third countries. They will buy Indian wheat through some other country. It is ultimately India. It makes more economic sense. It will be easier and much cheaper to buy it directly from India. So the economic logic and sense will ultimately prevail. And the same logic that has been given since yesterday, that economic logic doesn't, which I don't really believe in, that economic logic is not there in the Eurasian Economic Union, and for how long political or geopolitical requirements or objectives will overrule economic logic. If you inverse the logic, here it is the economic logic which will further take South Asia towards greater integration and at a much slower pace. That I understand. In the case of Europe, there was a groundswell after the Second World War and the vast destruction among the people of Europe to come together, to somehow eliminate war, to establish permanent peace and stability. In South Asia, the initiative has been more top-down. I mean, young leaders of Benazir Bhutto, Rajiv Gandhi, and of course, military dictator of Bangladesh, Ershad. It was his initiative. But there is, in fact, there is a People's SAARC. There is a Writers' Union of SAARC. And just now, there was an Ajoka theatre from Pakistan which had come to India. They came to JNU. And there is, among the people, there is a desire. They are still not very clear, but there is a desire. And people like my friend from Afghanistan was saying that how he can understand my language, Urdu or Hindustani, he talked to me. So there are these linkages. Bollywood, even in Central Asia, I don't know why Central Asians are now not so enthusiastic about Bollywood. This is what unites this whole region, including Central Asia. So economic logic and certain civilizational link of the past, which is there here also, and which is there in South Asia. That will ultimately, I believe, prevail. And recent political, geopolitical, ideological constraints will finally wither away. That is my understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you for question. Actually, Professor Pandey mentioned some part. Yes, there is a, first let me start from one of his point, and also it's a little bit contradict. Yes, there is a common, there is a Eurasian concept, but this is not the common. This is a Russian version, Kazakh version, and even Turkish version right now in Turkey also mentioning. The one which he mentioned about Olcay Süleymanov's idea, and also more is the Süleymanov taking idea from Lev Gumiliev. The basic on the ethnogenesis, the Slavs, Slavs and Turks tribes living, sharing this certain same territory. So then they had interaction that make them to more easily to cooperate and to share and have certain common and share ideas. But this idea is there, but is not the the main elites accepted. So that's the problematic. This is why, for that reason, this kind of the idea should also supported by the economic logic, economic interest of the certain group. Yes, Eurasian Economic Union already established, but this is state-led organization, and if this organization doesn't have the bottom-up support, the support coming the social, economic, and political interest group, and also elites, then it be really functional or not, which is the question mark. Because as you know, from 1990s until this time, how many organizations they established, and they didn't function what they expected, the people who established it, decision makers. So for that reason, to Eurasian Economic Union, or Putin preferred to, to have the political union at the end, have a certain problem which is need to overcome. Like you mentioned, Crimea issue is creating another bloc and make even some of the Eurasian Economic Union, member of the Eurasian Economic Union, Kazakhstan, afraid what is the Russian real goal. So and then, which is Diana's presentation, these Central Asian countries, some of them is not their economic interest, but they also have a security feeling threat, which in international relations we say bandwagoning. So to overcome that threat, they basically bandwagoning to Russia in that sense.
Okay. So we'll take a few more questions. You first, then Gerard, and then Seed. You've had your hand up for a long time. And the lady in the back also. So. And please keep them short. So we start there.
Yeah, for YASA, I find this policy bottom-up demands interesting, as you know, the way the European Union developed took many very surprising paths, and one of the channels really that resulted in the kind of development that we have seen is an obscure clause in the European law, which gives the European Court jurisdiction in all cases where some company feels put at a disadvantage in trading with a partner country. I mean, members of the European Union had quite protectionist tendencies to start with, but because of that clause, companies basically could cut back regulation in countries like France. Now, can you see anything similar happen within the Eurasian Union, where we have mainly these state capitalist companies operating? So, do you think that these kind of companies could play a similar role and maybe push their agenda? Could you see a similar role of the court of the Eurasian Union, which probably has been shaped according to the European court, but is of course provided by countries which don't have a great history in independent judiciaries? So,
there's no. Okay. Very easy. Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Shall we take some more
Some more
questions?
questions,
Yeah. Please.
My question is to Mr. Issa. You work in the national university, so you know somehow local context.
I've been in more than 10 years lived in Kyrgyzstan, but recently moved out.
So in Kyrgyzstan, you in the last slide, you were talking about the ideological patterns. And I would like to kind of remember Yana's presentation about the generations. And Kyrgyzstan is kind of more younger generation, but there is still a generation from the USSR who are remembering the past, and kind of this is the ideological patterns. But from other side, we can see there is a new generation. And from one side, new generation is legal migrants to Russia. From other side, they are kind of may face some ethnicities and may face some religious aspects. From one side, we see there's economic interest. From other side, ideological difference. And what do you think? How possible? Whether it will stay the same, kind of it will be considered as an ideological pattern, commonalities, or in a year or some of the years it will be contradictory.
Okay.
Seyit Bey?
Yeah, I have maybe
Behind.
the same question. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question to Mr. Yassar. According to the theories of international organizations, integration and cooperation, integration will have success if the states with the same culture, with the same political systems and regimes, and the same level of economic development.
Not the same economic development, at least have the same economic model which they want to follow. Because
in case of Eurasian Economic Union, we don't, maybe personal, I don't see anything of that. It's different cultures, different political regimes, different economic levels of development. And I wanted to know your opinion. Will it collapse, or it's a new model of integration, or it's just not an integration regional, it's just created and maintained by one personality like Putin?
Okay, maybe one more question. If okay, then.
Me? Okay. First question. First, nation state in Europe voluntarily give up some of their authority to supranational institution and the European Union institution. So that make those economic groups, interest groups to going to, for example, one of the institutions is the court, European Union Court. And that they can go over the court and they take the decision, and those European Union member state has to oblige decision of the court. As we know, in post-Soviet countries, they don't have independent court. This is coming the Soviet background and legacy of the past. Soviet, and even the past before the Soviet too, Central Asia, we can say that one. So then in Eurasian Economic Union, inside of Eurasian Economic Union, capitalist interest, state economic companies like the Gazprom, you cannot separate Gazprom interest from the state interest. So then, it's very simple to ask, they cannot have, the similar kind of court system or institution which is the solve the problem among those member countries or the companies from different member countries. So that's the second is the ideological patterns. Yes, there is a division between the old elite and emerging new generation. So, but the old elite still is ruling elite, not the just observing. And we don't know the new generation. They will be part of the ruling elite, or let's take the Kyrgyzstan example. Those new elite trying to leave the country and go somewhere in the world. Religious ethnicity emphasized. Why? Because these countries, including Kyrgyzstan example, I can tell because we did two projects, which one is the related religious, the other is the ethnicity. The religious ethnicity is emphasized by the both ruling elite and a certain level is a public too. So create a different identity from others. This is including the regional countries where they have similar religious understanding on a similar certain level ethnicity also close each other. In this pattern, if you look to this pattern itself cannot explain. But if this pattern is also parallel with the economic interests, then the changes can happen. And of course, the changes in society and state level will not happen within short time. This is, we are talking about generation. The average is the one generation 25 years, so it takes at least 25 years. For that reason, the very important for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, what will happen after Nazarbayev and Kerimov die, because they led their countries more than 25 years, almost, more than. The other one is the question is today what we have Eurasian Economic Union is the state-led organization. This is not just Putin's idea. This is the main ruling elite in Russia also prefer this one. This is sometimes, of course, we can approach this subject two ways. Some say that Russian using kind of a neo-imperialistic way. What is the neo-imperialistic way? The old imperialists, they occupy the land and they control the country. A neo-imperialist way is to control the more important area. What is the security, collective security treaty organization, and economic issue, Eurasian Economic Union. That way control the countries, which is one time was part of the Soviet Union. Especially Western scholars mentioning that one. The others saying that, okay, this is state-led organization, and when those states and the ruling, the elite which is ruling those states, lose their interest, and seeing that this organization is kind of problematic, problem in their shoulder, then they will ignore the organization, and they will that organization will die. Look, until this time, how many organization established by the post-Soviet countries.
We have time for a couple more questions, yes? So you first, and then Batim.
Just another question as a comment is the EU sui generis, and I read the same article comparing EU and ASEAN, and maybe comment maybe on somebody's questions, is that maybe ASEAN is a good example or better comparison for Eurasian Economic Union rather than EU. So because there, in ASEAN, it's national interest comes first, and they are not very ambitious in terms of forming any supranational institutions.
Political organization
political
also.
organizations, so they are only emphasizing economics, and it's not customs union, just free trade agreement. And even when we call our Eurasian Economic Union as a union, like strictly in economic sense, it's only on customs union stage.
Yeah.
Or even customs union with a lot of reservations. So it's kind of advanced free trade agreement, which we call, not even customs union. Only difference maybe it has only internal tariff. We are not a union, so to say. It's kind of a fancy word to say that it's a union. It's more like an ASEAN case. It's more similar to ASEAN rather than Europe. It's EU case is very different.
Okay, Batim.
I would have more of a comment than a question, like a debate. You have stated in your last answer to my question, bottom-up principle. I would like to challenge it theoretically. It sometimes looks that some principles very popular. I understand that it's important, but still, for example, we have such examples like Fukuyama end of history. It's very popular, which didn't come.
Which Fukuyama himself is saying, sorry, I failed.
But,
Fukuyama also, say that, I was wrong, so sorry.
yeah, so he understood that he was wrong.
Yeah.
Then, for example, liberal economic model, because sometimes, for example, such organizations as International Monetary Fund, it's very popular to say that liberal economic model is appropriate everywhere. It doesn't depend in which specifics. So, bottom-up principle sometimes may be challengeable, I think. And then we go to the specifics of post-Soviet area. And also we can remember the principle of democratization. For example, it's also saying that democratization is more possible with bottom-up principle. And is it possible with top-down principle? I think it's possible. And if we then go again to the post-Soviet area, I think top-down principle in post-Soviet area is really appropriate. And that's why integration happens also in post-Soviet area, because top-down principle here works, I think. Maybe you don't agree, but this is a question for debate. And also, some challenge you mentioned, maybe if I was clear with your idea, that Putin wants, in perspective, would like to make a Eurasian Economic Union as a political also union. But now I could say that even Europe today understands that they need political union. They came to the line when they have to make a progress. And if they not federalize, they understand that they may lose in future competitive world. So political integration is maybe not just the wish of Putin, it's a necessity in today's global competition. So what I want to say is that integration is possible it's possible in different regions, and it's possible on different principles. And if there is no Western conditions, EU conditions for Eurasian integration, it doesn't mean, from my point of view, that integration is not possible in Eurasia. Maybe in some different way, but still, the perspective exists, and we could let ourselves expect that something will come, than expect that it will lose.
I will add the small things. You are right, top-down principle only can success if that top-down create a spillover effect back to bottom. So the initiate or energize the economic, social, and political groups see mutual and common interest, then top-down effect may work. But it's not guaranteed. But if it is bottom-up spillover effect, it's more comparatively top-down effect is more easy to happen. So.
Perhaps just very briefly, because we don't want to steal time from lunch.
I just wanted to emphasize that in each case of regional integration has its own distinct logic and historical reasons. So in case of Europe, civilizational linkages and all that apart, there was a strong, overwhelming desire on the part of the people and governments in Europe to come together so that some of the things that happened in the past did not occur again. In case of ASEAN, it was slightly different. In fact, there was, to some extent, a common threat. Communist China, at that time, 60s and 70s, a communist China. Communist attempts in Indonesia. So that was, and then there was also an external factor. There was prodding and persuasion on the part of United States to come together. Later on, they discovered ASEAN way. Later on, economic logic was there, but not so much initially. It came later. ASEAN way as the common uniting principle came later. So in each case, things may follow different paths and unique models. There need not be a single reason or logic for all regional integrations. In Eurasia, you can. With time, it may evolve. There are already certain things. So I would not agree with the fact that it is only one man's ambition or objective. There is more to it. There is also a desire on the part of other countries or other member states for their own very specific reasons maybe. And with passage of time, there may emerge more reasons and logic to come or stay together.
Okay. I would like to thank all the panelists for their contributions and the audience for their active participation. In 1 minute, if I were to summarize this panel, we had contributions that looked kind of beyond the borders of the Eurasian Economic Union to other regions, the adjacent places, and looked at the question of regional integration in general. So is it a process that can be kind of reproducible across the regions? So we looked at different models, European Union model, the South Asian model, the failures, the successes. What I observed also is that there seems to be a kind of a teleological logic to this integration process, as if integration is necessarily something that has to happen, and there's a kind of a relentless economic logic that drives that process. And if we look from the political economy perspective, then what perhaps is also worth exploring is the global dynamic of the core and periphery. So if we have, for example, a situation where the former core and the periphery, the metropolitan areas integrate the former, also again, if we call them colonies, how does that model work? Or if it's just periphery to periphery integration, does that make a difference? And also, if we also bear in mind that regions are constructs as much as they are objective reality, and if we go back again to the history of how Europe was constructed, was very much through its opposition to the Orient, and exactly my point. So, again, in the conditions of the globalized world, and we know Central Asia, the states in the region gain independence under the conditions of accelerating globalization, then can we even still talk about, sovereign states as such? Is it, as Dina mentioned yesterday, the end of Westphalia? Does it make sense to talk about some kind of global assemblages and forms of deterritorialized statehood, right? As, for example, John Hathershaw and colleagues recently published an issue of Central Asian Survey where they talk about offshore Central Asia and how the states in the region are very much integrated into the global politics and economy through all kinds of global schemes that go beyond this logic of states and regions. So these are all questions that are worth exploring and debating.